Okay, I am going to attempt to show you bone markings. All the bone markings that I have in a list for you. As of yesterday, I posted, yesterday being 9/22, I posted the rest of the PowerPoint over the axial skeleton. Remember, the axial skeleton is the core skeleton of you, the skull, the vertebrae, the facial bones that go on with the skull, the clavicle and ribs, sternum, and sacrum and coccyx. I'm sure I missed some, but that's the gist of it. So everything that is, you know, um, central to you, the essential bones that protect your major organs. I posted this to your website. It is called Things to Know on the Skeleton. This list, I'm going to say, is a bit more detailed than you probably need to know, but there is no reason that I shouldn't be able to show you every single one of the things on the list. Now, I say this after having done research myself, so it's a lot to remember. Obviously, I've made notes here. Google is your friend. If what I point at, I'm not going to have the light on like this because it's too much glare off of the skull. So I'm going to keep it dark like this so that hopefully we can see the markings of the skull a little better. But I'm going to go through this list. My goal for this first video is to get through the first 2 pages. So far, I'm fairly certain I can get through this page and up to through sphenoid bone and parietal bone. So I haven't quite looked, oh, and ethmoid, sorry. I got this L right here that I still need to make sure that I understand before I try to tell you. So at least a page and a half in this first recording, and then a page and a half will finish off the axial skeleton, and then the last 2 pages are for the appendicular skeleton here. This is going to be an essential study guide for both your exam and your lab practical. I also posted this. These are things that I took notes on the first year that I taught this course, just general names and markings. It's a little less advanced than that list, probably more exactly what you need to know for the course and for your exam. So don't ignore either of these things. I forgot what I labeled this, something skeleton. They're under the PowerPoint. I'm using photos like this to, well, I'll put the light on for this one. Oh, no, too much glare. To make sure that I am also pointing to the right thing too. Also, I've Googled, also I've made notes. So everything I tell you should be correct. Just saying. I'm not going to go in order through this list because it doesn't really work that way, the way it's written, but I will hit everything on the list. Here is a skull. This is my friend. What is it in Hamlet? Yorick, I think is his name. We'll go with that. So we're going to talk about the cranial bones of the skull first, okay? Can I get this any farther away? Sort of. Okay, the first cranial bone is, of course, the frontal bone, right here. Oops. This is the frontal bone. It's what we call the forehead, essentially, right? And then we have a suture. We'll talk about it in a second. And we have the 2, this is the suture, the frontal bone. We have the 2 parietal bones. Remember, pariet is Latin for wall. So we have these 2 parietal bones. If you go to the side, you see another suture right here. And then you have the temporal bone, and there's one on each side. Then you have the occipital bone back here. I have this camera's, there we go. The occipital bone. Go to the face, get my little pointer. We have the 2 nasal bones right here. They are separated by this partition. Of course, they're fused together, but they do have this break, and you have the 2 nasal bones, so they form the bridge on both sides of your nose right here. You have the 2 maxillary bones, form the maxilla of the upper mouth. You can see that it was 2 bones that were fused together sometime before birth. Remember, if they don't fuse together, you can get cleft palates, and they can be very minor, or they can be so severe they go into the nasal cavity, and that causes issues. You have the lacrimal bones. They're very small bones on the side. A lacrimal should make you think of tear. Nope. These are these side bones: nasal bone, lacrimal bone. You have the zygomatic bones. The zygomatic bones go from the front of the face here. They arch around into the temporal bone back here. That's all the zygomatic arch is what it's called. The palatine bones are basically non-existent in the way that we view a skeleton whole, but they start here. They're beneath the lacrimal bone. You just get a tiny bit of it, and then they go deep into the face. The vomer bone, oh, and there's two of them, obviously. The vomer bone is right here. It's the base of the nose, right in here. It is only a single bone. You have the inferior nasal conchae, which are these two lower protuberances of the nasal cavity. Remember, the conchae are to make the air more turbulent in the nose, to filter it and warm it up. And then you have the mandible bone down here that forms the mandible of the jaw. So that is your outside features that we can look at. He's going to lose his head. Oh no, you lost your head. And so I'm going to turn it this way so that this is the frontal bone here, and this is the occipital bone back here. We're inside the skull now. First, looking at the front of the skull, or the top of the skull, sorry. You have the frontal bone. You have that suture separating the two parietal bones there. Okay, we are inside. Up here in the frontal bone, in what we would term the anterior cranium, so the front of the cranium, this is the ethmoid bone. Now this is the top of the ethmoid bone. It actually goes deep into the face, deep into the face here, and I'll show you a picture of the pieces that are inside the face in a little bit. In this middle cranial fossa, this is the sphenoid bone. If you can see, it kind of has what we call a moth or butterfly shape to it here. And then here is the occipital area in the posterior cranium. So we have anterior cranium, middle cranium, posterior cranium. And that's how the very first three columns on your things to know on the skeleton paper are broken into anterior cranium, middle cranium, and posterior cranium here. So we just did the cranial bones and the facial bones, and now I'm up here, and I'm gonna try to go in order for the rest of it. Ethmoid bone of the anterior cranium. It has specific markings. I'm gonna try the light. It's just too much light. Yep, okay. Yeah, you can see it better without the light. The very first thing listed is the foramen sacrum. The foramen, remember, is a hole, an opening. This is the foramen sacrum, right here at the very, very tip of the ethmoid bone. Then you have the olfactory foramina of the cribriform plate. This is the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. If you can see, you have all these little holes all the way through this cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. This is the olfactory foramina. So here is that foramen sacrum here, and then all these little holes are the olfactory foramina. Let me try to focus. It's not great. You can see, I'm going to tilt it a little bit sideways, a projection here in this cribriform plate. This is known as the crista galli, and that's listed on page 2. So I'll point it out again when we get there. But this projection is the crista galli. In the middle cranium fossa, you got a lot of foramens, okay? So I'm going to tilt it forward so you can see. These are the optic foramen. right here. So these are where your optic nerves travel through from your eyes, heading towards the back of the brain to the occipital lobe so it can transmit the picture. You have your foramen lacerum. I don't want to tell you wrong. Okay, so that's this larger one that's almost directly behind the optic canal. So you can only see the canal when I tilt it forward for the optics, but when I tilt it back to show you the rest, it kind of just looks like a depression here. Still optic canal. Here's the foramen lacerum, and there's one on each side, as you can see. You have your superior orbital fissure. That is the indentation under this projection right here. So your superior orbital fissure is the pushing in under this projection. The projection is called the anterior clinoid process, CLINOID, and this is the posterior clinoid process of the sphenoid bone. This is the ethmoid bone in the anterior. This is the sphenoid bone in the middle. In between the anterior process and the posterior clinoid process here, you have this depression. This is called, I don't want to tell you, the hypophyseal fossa. This is where the pituitary gland rests in the brain, okay? The whole middle section here is called the sella turcica, which is kind of a fun word. I'm saying things that are listed on page 2, so don't get confused if you're looking at page 1 and you're like, these aren't words. I'm just pointing out things as I go, and I will go back when we get to page 2. Okay, foramen lacerum, superior orbital fissure under this projection. Then you have 3 foramen to the side. You have a very small one up here that does not go through in this plasticine model, but would go through in real life. You have this larger one, then you have this really, really tiny one here, okay? The one up front that doesn't go through in this model is the foramen rotundum up here. Basically directly underneath the superior clinoid process is the foramen rotundum here. It's just a depression in the skull. This is the foramen ovale. It's typically a little bit more oval shaped, so that's where the ovale comes from. And this is the foramen spinosum. Okay, so you have 5 openings right here. You have the optic canal, the foramen lacerum, foramen rotundum, ovale, foramen ovale, and foramen spinosum right here. And of course they repeat on this side as well. Okay. And those are all the middle cranial fossa that they have listed for you. I'm going to let you know, of course, optic canal and these 3 foramen are going to be the most confusing for you, but also most likely to show up on your lab practicals and your exam. And then let's go to the posterior cranium. This is obviously the foramen magnum, right? This is where the spinal cord and the vertebrae go through the cranium down into the spinal column and have the vertebra canal surrounding it, or they're in the vertebral canal. If you tilt kind of anteriorly, these large openings right here are the internal auditory meatus. So this is an opening for your hearing, for your hearing pathway there. The smaller openings, so I'm tilting more interior, you have small, oh, 2 interior. You have 2 small openings, one on each side here. These, sorry, it's hard to look at a camera and then look at the screen. These are your jugular foramen. So let me actually just flip it upside down. Well, no, yeah, these are your jugular foramen here. So here's your auditory, external auditory foramen, and then here is your jugular foramen. So if you come back through, you can see where that probe is coming out through. So jugular foramen. And then you have something called the hypoglossal canal. It is this canal that is formed. You kind of see these 2 bones protrude down. Remember, these are the occipital condyles here that attach to the atlas to do that nodding motion. And so the canal that is formed here by these occipital condyles is known as the hypoglossal canal. So first three columns, starting in the anterior cranial fossa, your foramen sacrum, your olfactory foramina of the cribriform plate, your optic canal, here, your foramen lacerum or lacrium, let me say the name, lacerum, your foramen rotundum here and here, your foramen ovale here and here. See, this one is more oval shaped. And then your foramen spinosum here and here. Oh, and your supraorbital fissure here, which there actually is a fissure, but I don't think I can get it. Oh, you can kind of see the opening right there. Then in the posterior, you have the internal auditory meatus here and here. Directly below them and much smaller are the jugular foramen. You have the hypoglossal canal formed by those occipital condyles, and then you have the foramen magnum there. That is not all the openings you have in your skull. I'm going to flip it over and try to pull this maxilla back. So we're going to get to the foramen in the inferior aspect of the skull. So now we're looking from below. If this mandible wasn't here and we could just have the maxilla, the very first thing is the incisive fossa, which is right here. Okay, this is the incisive fossa. I would lift it up, but I have to hold this mandible. Well, I guess we can. So ignore the spring, please. Obviously, we don't have springs in our mouth. Here is the incisive fossa there. See? Then we come back to the palatine bones. These aren't very well defined. Let me try the slide again, because now we have shadow. Oh, that was focused, sorry. Where's the light? Oh, apparently I'm capturing a picture, whatever. Where's the light? I don't know what just happened. This just needs to go away. Okay, so here's our palatine bones back here, down here. And you're gonna have the greater palatine foramen and the lesser palatine foramen. And to be honest, I can't really test you on them because they don't exist on the skeleton here. The greater palatine foramen would be right here where these two depressions are in this model. And then the lesser one would of course be right behind it and much smaller. Let me get this picture here. And let me take off the light. So here is the palatine bone. Here is that incisive fossa, much larger in this picture. Here's the palatine bones. And you see this superior, I just lost my words, greater palatine foramen here and here. And then the lesser ones here and here as well. Okay. Then looking at the bottom of the skull, you have to kind of flip it in your head. Let me get it right. And look at the foramens from underneath. My hand is in the way and that's really annoying. Okay, so then you have the same foramens that we saw from inside the skull, but upside down. So here's your ovales, again, here and here, foramen ovales. Here is the spinosum behind them, the little guys here and here. Here's your foramen lacerum right here. Okay, so we're just looking at it from a different area. You have your carotid canal. The carotid foramen are here, here and here are your carotid foramen. So where the carotid blood vessels flow through. And then your jugular foramen, once again, I don't want to, are actually along, because of the external auditory meatus, they kind of lose their structure, but they're here-ish. Oh, you can't see what I'm doing. They're here-ish between the carotid foramen and the external auditory meatus. So obviously I can't test you on that either. You have the stylomastoid foramen. So remember, these two tiny projections coming off this back of the skull here is called the styloid process here. And you have Two foramens, tiny, tiny little guys. Behind them, see, it's hard to see that there's a process coming out when it's upside down, but there's the stylomastoid foramen here, and then once again here behind that process as well. Turn to the side, and along the back here, you have the mastoid foramen, this little hole way back in the temporal bone here, and well, sure, here's, I guess, I don't know, the markings are not very clear. Mastoid foramen are on the outside inferior process, not process. Foramen magnum again, big one, and then that hypoglossal canal again. And hypoglossal means below the tongue, by the way, so that's very interesting. Okay, almost done with foramen. You have your supraorbital foramen, or also known as the supraorbital notch, above the eyeball. You have the infraorbital foramen below. You have the zygomatical foramen, which they're not indicated here, but they're right at the peak of the cheekbones, right here, like right where it peaks out, and right here as well. And sorry, that's the zygomaticofacial foramen. And then you have your mental foramen down here in the mandible. You have one on each side, the mental foramen. So supraorbital foramen, infraorbital foramen, the zygomaticofacial foramen, and the mental foramen as well. That might be the end of the openings in the face and skull. It's not the end of the face and skull. But to follow along with this list, then you have the bones of the inner ear. So I just got this giant ear model here. Can I hear you? And here, so external pinna of the ear is your earlobe, right? And then you have the internal ear. You have the internal auditory canal. This is where the eardrum would be. The tympanic membrane would be right here. And then you have that leads to the bones of the ear. Now this isn't just the bones of the ear. Get this out. This is the bones of the ear, which is this. And then like the internal concha, you can see that it's snail-shaped here, and then the auditory nerve, so ignore all this. And you have the three bones of the ear. You have the incus, the malleus, and okay, so you have the stapes here, this little itty bitty bone. It's shaped like, not a horseshoe, but something that do with the horse, okay? The stapes here, the malleus here, and the incus is somewhere involved in that, so not super important, but incus, malleus, stapes. I mean, it's like super, super important for life and hearing, but in terms of this lab practical, not super important. And then you have the hyoid bone. Remember, it is a bone that does not articulate with any other bone in the human body. It is there to support muscles of the tongue and the windpipe. It is right in the lower throat, or upper throat, I guess, actually. I think it kind of looks like vampire teeth. See, it's got those little projections coming off of it. There's not any projections or tuberances you need to name. You just need to understand that this shape, if you were to see this shape in a lab practical, I'm trying to get the best picture of it. It's the hyoid bone. So here's, close, nope. Focus. Anyway, not a whole lot to it there. Okay. All right, that's page 1. Page 2 starts with the sutures of the skull. Let's put our heads back together. See what I did there. Okay, and look at the sutures of the skull. Here's the frontal bone again. Here is the coronal suture, right? It separates the frontal bone from the parietal and temporal bones because it goes down here into the side. here. Stupid, focus, would you? Okay, and to the side here. So here's your coronal suture, all the way around the skull. Sorry. Then you have your sagittal suture here. This separates the two parietal bones at the top of the skull. You have your lambdoidal suture that separates the parietal and temporal bones from the occipital bone. So it's at the back of the skull here. And then on the sides between the parietal bone and the temporal bone, you have the squamous suture here, one on each side, of course. So, and here as well. And then it has 6 things to talk about for the zygomatic arch. Really, it's the zygomatic arch. They're trying to make it a little extra. But if you can see the break here, this break in the bone, here's the frontal process, or the frontal bone zygomatic arch. No, it's not. Here's the frontal bone. Here, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But, let me stop sharing the camera for a minute. I went and got you a picture so that we can look. Okay, so here's the zygomatic bone here. And I want you to know that this little piece is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. And this is the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. I didn't realize they flipped. That's really, really funny. Sorry. And here is the maxillary process. So I get what they are at. Okay, never mind. I read the list wrong. So, oh, I don't know if it went straight back to camera, so I'm just gonna stop share and go to camera to make sure, because you know. This is the maxillary process of the zygomatic bone. This is the frontal process of the zygomatic bone, and this is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. I don't care if it wants to give 6 names to the zygomatic arch. You just need to know that this is the zygomatic arch, and also you need to know that infraorbital foramen there. Frontal bone, technically the supraorbital fissure or foramen / notch is on the frontal bone. Remember, you are born with your frontal bone separated. So you have that mectopic suture here that goes away in your 6 to 8 years of life. And then it says zygomatic process. Like, who cares? It's okay, fine. So you process out. You have this bone structure here. Good Lord. Go below frontal bone on your list. It says parietal bone, and it says superior temporal line and inferior temporal line. Here, you can vaguely see this superior temporal line here. And only in pictures will they denote a smaller, less projection of a line below it. So that's the inferior temporal line. But here is your superior temporal line that could be asked on a lab practical. Most likely I wouldn't be that crazy. Most likely. But you know, I can be crazy. Okay, the sphenoid bone. So let's lose our heads again. Sphenoid bone. Now, the way that we have the skull, you can only see the, I forgot the word, superior portion of it, I guess, is what I want to say. So I'm actually going to list what I can from the list on here, and then I'm going to show you a picture again of things that you can't see with the way. Well, I guess you actually can, but I'll do everything I can and then show you the picture. Okay, you have the greater wing of the sphenoid bone, which is here on the deeper part of the skull, and you have the lesser wing kind of up above it here with that anterior clinoid process coming down. You have the hypophyseal fossa, again, which is where the pituitary gland rests here. You have those optic foramens and canals again, so we've already covered those. You have the chiasmatic groove here between the optic canals gonna get really close, maybe you can see it better. Between the optic canals, you have this small kind of ridged groove right here. This is known as the chiasmatic groove. You have the lesser wing of the sphenoid here, greater wing, lesser wing. That's gonna be better in the picture. The anterior clinoid process here, both of these, one on each side. And here you can kind of see that they are projections better. And then you have the posterior clinoid processes here and here. It's actually the two tips on either side of the back of the hypophyseal fossa here and here. In between, this is the dorsum celliae, is this line in between the two posterior clinoid processes here. The whole thing, the whole middle structure from chiasmatic groove back to dorsum celliae, this whole thing is called the sella turcica here. Then you have that supraorbital fissure again underneath the anterior clinoid process. And once again, you have your rotundum, your ovale, your spinosum, and your lacerum here. If I was to flip this over, this is all the sphenoid bone, remember. You have these two projections down. This is still the sphenoid bone right here and here. Here's the nasal canal, and then coming back from the nasal canal, you have these two projections. These are your medial and lateral pterygoid plates. So medial means to the midline. So you have the two going to the midline or on the anterior inside sides, and then you have the two going out. And so those are your lateral pterygoid plates. This kind of allows you to see the projections better. But this picture allows you to see the projections better. So let me show you this picture. Well, here, let me go to the first one I have. So here's looking at it from the very, very top again. And you can see the fissures and the optic canal. Here's that chiasmatic groove. That's a better picture of it. Here's those anterior clinoid processes here. That posterior clinoid process here and here. And then the dorsum celliae. Where this is pointing in, saying sella turcica, that's the whole structure of the middle. And that where it's actually pointing is the hypophyseal fossa. Foramens, foramens, foramens. You got the foramens probably down there. There's that lesser wing with that anterior clinoid process, and then the greater wing. And I'm going to scroll. Here is that lesser wing again. Here is the greater wing. Now we're looking at it from the back as if we pulled it out of the skull and are holding it in front of us. Here is the dorsum celliae and the two posterior clinoid processes. If we were to go down, here is your medial pterygoid plate, and here is your lateral pterygoid plate here. So I hope that gives you an idea. The last thing we're going to talk about in this recording, I know I don't finish the skull, but like I said, I don't have the occipital, temporal, and mandibular processes all labeled for myself yet to tell you. The last thing we're going to talk about is the ethmoid bone. So this is a picture of the ethmoid bone. So to give you an idea, real quick, I'm going to go back to the camera here. So once again, the ethmoid bone is here in the very front of the skull, and it comes down in between the eyes, down into here. So this projection that's coming out of the ethmoid bone is the top of what you're looking at in the picture. The top of what you're looking at in the picture. And it's actually turned so that you are staring at it like you're staring at somebody's eyeballs. So you can see that they took it here and pulled it out sideways. What you can't see in this picture, because we're not looking at it from above, you can't see that, oh God, where'd my page go? I must have flipped it behind. Foramen sacrum, or the olfactory forma of the cribriform plate. But those are both up here on either side. Well, the foramen sacrum's right here in this pivot, this down point, and the olfactory foramina are on either side of this projection. The projection is called the crista galli, as I told you. And you can see here the cribiform plate. So those are the first two on the list for ethmoid bone. And then you have the middle nasal concha here, which once again, those are for turbulating or making the air turbulent. You have this huge perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone that reaches far down into the face, and you can see you can kind of see that it kind of forms some of the back of the nose area there. And then you have, oh, I shouldn't have made that here, Control D. There we go. Then you have the orbital plate of the ethmoid bone. So you see here, it actually forms part of the orbital socket for the eyeballs there, right here. This is forming part of the orbital socket here and here. Okay, so that is going to end this first recording. I can't have my video showing because I have the camera hooked up. And I hope that that was clear and not super confusing. Thank you so much.